Hello to everyone who is just jumping on. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today. We're going to give it just one more minute here, give folks a few minutes to hop onto the call and join us, and then we will kick things off and get started. All right, thank you everyone for attending our webinar today. This is Field Tested BIM Tools and Tactics for Seamless Team Buy-in. On the call today, we've got Jeff Drews, President over at BIMTM, Donnie, who is also a new member of the BIMTM team, and we have Jeremy Poppy. We are so thrilled to have these guys all joining us today for this discussion. So thank you for joining us. If you have any questions during the webinar, please drop them in the Q&A function in your Zoom toolbar, and we'll make sure to follow up with you guys. We'll also be running some polls during the webinar, so make sure to keep an eye on those. We'd love to hear your responses and kind of gauge where everyone is at with their BIM. And finally, the webinar today is being recorded. You can find all of our recordings on the Evolve YouTube channel. All right. Thank you so much. And with that, I'll pass it off to Jeff.
Thank you, Marina. Hey, everybody. As Marina said, I'm Jeff Drews. I'm one of the co-founders here at BIM Technology Management. And today we have a panel discussion on field-tested BIM tools and tactics for seamless team buy-in. This is kind of an interesting one. We wanted to take a little bit different approach and kind of go outside of the software and talk about what are some of the strategies to get everybody involved in this process, because it takes everybody to make this work. So with me today, I have Donnie Bogle-Boldinger. Sorry. He's our BIM VDC Construction Management Director. Donnie, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so my role at BIM Technology Management is I head up our services facing general contractors. So we partner with general contractors as kind of an augmentation of their services if they need that to potentially lead coordination, for example, or will also come and work as consultants within their company to implement new services if needed, or just kind of help them create some best practices internally and really setting those standards with them.
Awesome.
So my history has been with general contractors, obviously, and I'm just generally passionate about getting the whole team to buy in through this coordination process. I think that's really what makes it successful. It's a shame when teams go through this process and then at the end of the day, the end result isn't followed.
All right. Next up, we had Jeremy Frost. He had some technical difficulties joining us today. And actually, Marina, I skipped over it, but if you could pull up our first poll, we want to just get a little sense of who's all in the audience today. So if you could fill out the poll and just kind of let us know what your BIM experience level is, we can try to tailor this webinar a little bit more to your specific needs. And Jeremy from Staff Electric, I'll let you go next and kind of introduce yourself and let everyone know who we're dealing with here.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Yep, I'm Jeremy Poppy. I'm with Staff Electric. I have been in the electrical industry for about 9 years. I come from the field, so I started as an apprentice. Eventually made my way up to becoming a journeyman, ran a couple jobs after I topped out, and about 2 years ago, I got asked to move into the BIM department. So it's a super interesting question at the time. I knew very, very little about BIM, very little about coordination. I actually had to look up how to pronounce Revit before I got in the department. So that's kind of where I started in BIM. Obviously, I had the field background, but not a whole lot of other experiences that fed into BIM other than that. So what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis here in the BIM department is staff's always trying to take everything in the model and utilize it in some way. So RTS points, prefab, we're looking for issues that maybe we could RFI early on that we wouldn't have to do during installation. Maybe seeing risks, so like big manpower humps, safety risks, so maybe like big racks or things like that we have to install. And what I'm trying to do is be in the BIM department and kind of advise to what's downstream, what's down the pipeline on the field end of things, so that what we're doing in the model and when we're coordinating is actually going to make sense later on. I would say the only other part to that too is I'm trying to advise the field of how the coordination process actually goes. You're going to get a huge amount of variation in the field of their understanding and trying to make it clear and simple to them how kind of the whole process goes and where they can make the biggest impact in the process. So we'll probably talk about that a lot today, but things early on are super critical and super important. By the time something gets to the field like prefab, it is probably way too late to actually make any changes. So that's a little bit about me, and thank you very much for having me here.
Awesome. So it looks like we got results on our first poll. It looks like the majority of the group is seasoned. We have some green and some pro, and a couple of people who chose body mass index. So I'm glad you're joining us today to learn a little bit more about what BIM actually is. And Jeremy, I'm glad that whatever you looked up to pronounce Revit properly worked out for you.
Thank you.
So before we get too into the panel discussion itself, I wanted to make sure we were all kind of on the same page about what the perfect BIM world looks like. And to me, that just means we're utilizing BIM and the model from start to finish in a project. So that starts in conceptual design. So we're utilizing a Revit model. We're doing 3D scanning. We're putting renderings together, and we're allowing our owners and architects to get into AR, VR, MR model. After that, we're doing some spatial coordination. So we're just kind of identifying basic lanes for mechanical, electrical, plumbing, just to ensure that when we get a little bit further downstream, that we're not having to make significant design changes. And then when we move into our design development stage, it's kind of this integral process where our engineers and our subcontractors are working together on a design instead of the design team creating a design and then bringing the subcontractors on board later, only to find out that things don't necessarily work and we're having to submit lots of RFIs and change orders downstream. After that, or kind of integral with that, I guess, we'll put MEP coordination as the next phase. And for me, that means having everybody involved in this process. It doesn't necessarily just mean the BIM coordinators or the BIM engineers sitting in a meeting together. It's having the designers and the field team and other important people in the same room to make decisions to make sure that things are being done in the best interest. And once we have that fully coordinated, signed off model, we're utilizing it downstream for construction and project management. So like Jeremy alluded to earlier, For his team, they use it for RTS points and prefabrication and scheduling, and they use it out in the field to install, and all kinds of other things that we are only just starting to realize the potentials of. And then lastly, facility management. So we want to make sure that all of this effort is utilized for our owners as well. So that means having a model turned over to them that's been quality controlled, and it has smart asset data in there that they can utilize for maintenance and scheduling and things like that. So I guess from here, I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint, and we're just kind of going to get into the panel, but I wanted to make sure everyone knew what we were talking about when we were talking about the BIM process. So I gotta figure out how to stop sharing this now. Oh, yeah. Hold on 1 second, guys. Sorry. There it is. All right. So Donnie, I'm gonna start with you. We kind of talked about how things looked on the front end of the project. So do you have strategies for building trust along the way when we're starting to get our different parties involved?
Yeah, I think trust is critical through this process. If trust is not built, then this becomes a really adversarial process where people are kind of at each other's throats, and ultimately it doesn't do anyone good. The process that you just laid out, Jeff, is one of collaboration, and that collaboration requires teamwork and trust. So yes, I think meeting people where they're at and understanding where they're at as a human, as a company, is really important. And then basing the entire approach off of that. We have best practices, we implement those best practices. Also, if there's a team member that is not up to speed in one way or another on the team, then that needs to be addressed. And we need to work with them in order to get them to a point where that benefits the team. Also, just like generally seeking feedback and implementing that feedback, it also just builds so much trust. If a particular portion of the workflow doesn't work for whatever reason for a team member, then let's have a conversation about it. Maybe we can change something in the workflow in order to make that work. Maybe we can't, but at least we're trying. And just how information flows through the process, making sure that that everyone that needs to be a part of those communications is a part of those communications, and prioritizing the field from those early stages as well is critical. That's really where you start getting the buy-in from the field. And when we're in design and we're talking to the sheet metal foreman about how this duct is going to be hung in this precarious location, for example, like that's impactful. It shows that they matter to the process.
Absolutely. Marina, can you pull up the next poll? Because I think it kind of ties into what we're talking about a little bit right now. So yeah, so what extent is the field team involved in your BIM process? I'm not going to read all the questions. I'll kind of let you do that. But so Donnie, so we asked about strategies, but I guess the real question to me is, who are we getting involved in the process early on? You mentioned the sheet metal team, but when you're starting coordination, do you just pull in your BIM folks? Do you just pull in designers, or what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think it depends on the team members. someone that might be a little less seasoned in the BIM process, I might ask that they have the field represented, a design engineer if they have a design scope specific to their in their scope of work, a project manager included. I think that if it's a more seasoned company that understands the workflows, they understand when to escalate issues to the field, when things can kind of be worked on within the BIM environment and the BIM team. I think that I tend to be a little bit more lenient with those folks, because I trust that they know how to navigate those situations. But at a bare minimum, the project manager and the BIM representative needs to be in these kickoff meetings and understanding what those expectations are, what information is needed when, how, and just generally how the process is going to flow.
That makes a lot of sense. Jeremy, I think this is a good opportunity for you. What was your first experience with BIM as a field person?
Yeah, so I think I was about a third-year apprentice. I had not done any kind of coordinated jobs before that. So as far as like the BIM world and coordination goes, kind of had no idea it even really existed. At that time, the apprenticeship didn't even teach very much about coordination. They do now. Also, it really wasn't that long ago. And really what we saw was something completely new and completely bizarre. So we were still installing electrical, and all the trades around us were also doing coordination, or at least building off of coordination. We're all installing the same trades they always did, but it was completely new. And that's because we're used to going off of construction drawings and really connecting all the dots between them. Is so bizarre to have somebody come out and basically say, somebody else in the office already figured out where you're going to put everything. We're going to kind of like pre-build it for you. We're going to give you drawings to build off of, so like prefab installation drawings, that we were really bad at reading because we had never read a drawing in that amount of detail. We were more given construction documents as almost like guidance. And then, we had a lot of tools and resources available to us. So we had like NWDs. We didn't know they were called that. We didn't really know how to use them. We didn't know any of the tools, like even just the measuring tool. We didn't really know how to utilize that. And it turned into a really frustrating process for us because we were seeing, like, I remember the plumbers were very good they were experienced at this. They knew how to build a coordinated job. And they felt really bad. They would always come up to us and say, "You're not where you're supposed to be." And, in the past, we were used to, you have to understand, the field's used to, I say, "Well, why don't you just like do a saddle, or you can kind of change your elevation? You really need me to move?" He says, "Well, yeah, because it's all prefab. So I don't really have the capacity to just change this." And then I'm going against the model. So now I'm kind of putting myself at risk to move my stuff later. I should really be going where I'm supposed to go. So I think that's kind of my first experience, and I think really the most interesting part of that is, even though maybe not me as a third year, but the rest of the team I was with was very good at installing electrical. They were not very good at installing coordinated electrical. So there's this huge skill gap to actually work off of a coordinated job.
So Donnie, Jeremy brought up an interesting point there. He was saying early on, a lot of the field guys didn't necessarily know the requirements that impact the field teams around this BIM process. What are your strategies with your teams to kind of make sure that that's carried through downstream? Is there anything that you do?
Yeah, I think the sign-off process is critical for those that aren't aware. There's in a model coordination process, there's a line in the sand, I'll call it, where everyone agrees that everyone or with it or a certain scope of work is where we want it to be, and there will be a sign off process in order to lock in that that scope of work. So I say that scope of work because sometimes the schedule dictates that we're only signing off on 1 or 2 different trades that are priority. But more often than not, it's an area. So we're signing off on a particular floor, and that sign off, we save a read-only file of the model, so everyone knows on a particular date, and that's referenced in the sign-off document. And everyone can go back to that when they're installing in that area. So from a general contractor's perspective, this is a huge risk management tool. It allows us to hold our subcontractors accountable for what is installed and correctly and incorrectly. And from a trade partner perspective, it protects you. It allows you to go to other trades that are not following the process the way that it's intended, and say, hey, like, this isn't what we agreed to. We agreed to X, and you're doing Y. And there's financial incentive to that. And so I think there's an education process that goes along with that. Some people just need to not do it, and then they realize that they need to do it. Other folks, we have conversations on the general contracting side. I'll have a conversation with my superintendent, for example, about how this tool can be used in order for quality control purposes, for example, where you can go out and you can have the model on an iPad, looking up at all of the rough-in locations and being able to tell who's at what elevation and who's in the wrong spot. So, and once they hear, like, oh, there's accountability when there's a tool that can create accountability within this environment when there's conflict or issues. It's just like, more often than not, just like that. That's impactful. That's a big deal.
I don't think it's quite that easy though. So I'm gonna put a question back to Jeremy. So we go through this entire process here. We made sure we coordinated it. Your shop fabricated it. How do you prevent the guys in the field from just being like, F it, this doesn't work. I'm ripping this apart and I'm doing whatever I want here?
Yeah, so I think I would kind of answer that in 2 ways. One is a very theoretical kind of ideal situation, and that's to have them actually be able to install it in their own way. So that means getting them involved very early, making sure that they understand the coordination process, and you can literally have them put it in. We'll obviously model it and do the computer work and the back end work. But when we run into like frictions with other trades or just general kind of constructability questions, you can have them advise and then just do it that way. So now they're actually going to get exactly what they wanted at the end of the day. So that's ideal. That might not always happen. It kind of depends on the person, and it might just depend where your company is.
What are some of your strategies for getting the field involved early on in the process to make sure they get their say in how you're routing things, and they don't have to complain about it later on after sign off?
Yeah, so strategies to get them involved early. It's a multi-job thing. So I kind of describe like what we do on the first job with somebody. What ends up happening is exactly what Donnie was talking about, but with the building the trust. And it sounds kind of soft, and it sounds like not something you can put a metric to, but it is absolutely true. And what we do is we focus to build trust, is focus on making their job successful with the coordination. So we'll kind of go leaps and bounds above what we typically would do or what we would typically advise to do, just based on like efficiencies in the BIM department, but to make sure that they're successful. Because once they see kind of a win, they'll kind of come back and say, okay, I understand my input early on. It actually has impact. Especially if you get a loss, it's so bad, because then they start seeing the coordination process as, okay, well, I put a bunch of work in and I ended up getting something that didn't work anyway. So next time I'm only going to go to the meetings they absolutely require me to do, like they told on my PM, and now I have to come. And I don't really care about actually giving them good input, because I don't trust that what they're going to give me is going to work anyway. So I'm going to do as little as possible, and I'm going to rework everything when it gets here. So for the first job, for the first go around, how do you kind of get them involved? Because they haven't seen a win yet, is actually making sure that they understand the process. And a lot of people in any department kind of take everything for granted. Everything's very obvious to them because they're doing it every day. So really explaining and letting everybody know, they don't necessarily know even what a sign off means. Don't take that
Right.
for granted. Um, Definitely a lot of guys, like type A guys, want to pretend like they know everything. So maybe just explain sign off to them, whether they are pretending to know or not, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, and explaining what the consequences are of not having certain things done by sign off. And really kind of, when you say, hey, this is the process, this is how it's going to go, and kind of doing like that swim lane thing, here's where I need you to be at these different points, here's where I'm going to be, I'm going to take care of that myself, but eventually it's going to get to this point, and I need you to come in and then do these specific things, and really walk them down that road. Hopefully you can get a win, and then from there it just kind of builds, and once you have that trust, they will be coming to you sometimes more than you even want. So
That sounds like the ideal situation, but I think we know there's plenty of people out there who are looking for the the one thing that's wrong, just to kind of build off of it, and I guess complain about things because they don't necessarily want their job to change, or they're used to doing it a certain way. So how do you deal how do you deal with those personality types when it doesn't matter what you do, it's not up to their expectations, I guess, Jeremy.
right. So one of the first things you can do is make sure you're selecting the right project team. So yeah, you're gonna have some guys who have been doing construction a certain way for a very long time. Some are willing to buy in, some you just know are not going to. You need to make sure that you're picking the right team. Donnie had kind of alluded to that earlier. Or if you have a team that wants to buy in, so say you have somebody who's maybe a general foreman, maybe he's ready to go, he's ready to do a coordinated job. Well, then get a foreman in there, especially like a younger one who's more open to things, or maybe seen put in prefab themselves during their apprenticeship. Get them on that project team so they can kind of help advise. General foremen and older guys are really interested in learning from guys that they brought up themselves, rather than a guy like me in the BIM department who maybe they don't necessarily know that well. So now, as far as just like these conflicts, like you're forcing me to do this, why did you put it in the computer that way? I just want to run it myself. We tried to early on kind of explain, hey, look, everyone else is basically building this job. So the Jeremy Frost, he likes to call it like just virtual construction, as explaining that to the field. I really like that, and saying, hey, we're literally building this right now. We're doing our best. We're looking out for you, even though you don't maybe necessarily want to be a part of it, or you're a little combative. We're trying our best to make sure this works. And we're kind of forced to coordinate it. We're not all getting together for fun or to screw you over, or we think that we could even do it better than you. The GC and the customer are kind of requiring this. So maybe we can just kind of make, like, I'm not saying Donnie make the GC the enemy, but say, hey, look, we're in on it, we're doing it. We're gonna try to do it the best way we can. Otherwise, we wouldn't have got the job in the first place.
I think it's a good time to kind of bring up the next poll, Marina. What
I'll take
are
the fall, by the way. If you need to make an enemy, I'll take it all day.
Okay,
I think,
thank you.
as I want to dovetail off of Jeremy's
yeah.
point, and as if especially since we have some body mass index folks out there. I think like when you're first when you have your first projects that are doing this new thing, I think the really really identifying the key team members. And so what does that mean? And I think like at least my gut reaction whenever I'm looking at something new is always like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to get this guy transferred over to this new way of thinking? And it's like, yes, but we need wins, and that guy and we all know one of them. There the is not likely the first person to lead a project of this type of planning. And so finding someone that's going to buy into the process is critical. And that because you're going to have your believers and your non-believers. And so like you need to identify your believers, and your believers are going to make it successful, opposed to your non-believer. If you put a non-believer on the project, they're going to make it unsuccessful, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think, or go ahead, Jeremy.
I was just gonna say the believers will eventually turn the non-believers over.
Absolutely.
I'm really not kidding, and I think most people who are in construction would believe me that we'll have a guy who's kind of stubborn about the whole thing, get a big W. And really, what he's doing is he's going to be at the tavern somewhere on some weekend, pulling up pictures and saying, "Look what we did here. We got this done." And he's scrolling through pictures. And guys who wouldn't maybe necessarily believe someone in the BIM department are looking at these pictures and saying, "Hey, Bob, did that really work that well for you?" And taking a keen interest in us kind of always having our door open in BIM and saying, "Yeah, come on in here. We may or may not be able to help you with your job." But at least having that door open so that when they hear from a believer, we can start getting them to buy in, and kind of having them take the initiative on it.
So we did get one question that popped up, and I think it might be a good time to answer it. I'll just put it up on the screen for you guys, and then I'll let either Jeremy or Donnie, or maybe I'll even take it myself. But how do we manage the expectations with your own team when other trades who are doing VDC are not following through? That's a big problem that I think everybody's encountered if you've been doing this for a while. The general contractor is not holding others accountable for their instance. Do you find this hard to hold your team to the plan? Jeremy, you want to take that one first? That's tough.
Yeah, it is a tough question. So I think the way that I'm interpreting this is basically the GC is playing more, at least in the BIM process, a construction manager kind of role of just kind of getting everyone together, and you guys are going to coordinate it yourself, and I'm not going to take a ton of responsibility.
That's not the
And
way I'm understanding it. I'm understanding
okay,
it that they're being forced to do MEP coordination, and then with the guys in the field aren't necessarily installing per the sign-off model. So everybody's kind of getting forced to just go rogue after sign-off. Oh man, that's really tough. I mean, it's a contractual obligation for us to do this. We need to make sure that we're utilizing it. I would say the strategy I've used in the past is make sure your project managers are actually using it to their benefit. And especially if you're doing prefabrication, because you can already say like, this has been built. That's a change order. We're going to essentially be building this twice. So I would say try to figure out how to actually utilize it for your own benefits, because if we followed that perfect BIM process, you would already have RTS points with embeds in the deck. You'd already have prefabricated material. And when it all comes out to the job site, nothing's working and it's a change.
yeah, so I think Donnie might have something really interesting to say to this, being from the GC role. Um, But one thing I'll tell you is we actually have a job that this is actually going on right now. And luckily, because we're doing everything, we're explaining this to the GC and the customer and saying, you wanted to do a coordinated job. We're fully on board. We're playing by the rules. And I'm sure Peter kind of knows this, that even if you can prove that somebody's out of their place and you can tattletale on them and make them move, it still slows you down. It still has a cost impact on you. And you don't want to be that sub who's putting in cost impacts like that. But what we're doing is, because we're prefabbing it and we do have those embeds and we're kind of ready to go, we're just rolling ahead and we're just getting all of our stuff in exactly where it goes. We're not just steamrolling anybody, but we're just putting our stuff in first, and it actually makes the whole job better, because then people doing whatever they want can now go around us. And we can kind of say, hey, we put our stuff where it's supposed to be. And if you just want to do it your own way, that's fine. We're already out of there.
So Donnie, I want to kind of spitball off this a little bit and throw something random your way, but how do you deal with subcontractors who are installing ahead of sign off?
Yeah, that's that can be a tough conversation, and even from internally within a general contractor, sometimes believe it or not, the coordination schedule isn't always synced up to the construction schedule. And so sometimes you'll even see it internally, where we're trying to get RTS points out for people to put their anchors in a cast in place deck, and we're not ready for it, for example. And so it's a real challenge. If my message to people that want to install prior to sign off is, that's fine. Know that you're installing at risk. So if anything, I'm not going to prioritize what you're fabbing now in the coordination process just because you're fabbing it. That's not how this works. And so, but so if it works out, fine, great, good for you. But also, like, we need to, this can't just be the Wild West. And I think from I've been thinking about this situation a lot lately, and from a general contractor's perspective, once I start seeing change orders come in, I mean, no one wants to be that person. But once I start to see change orders come in, then things get real, right? If there's a cost impact, and I start seeing that early and often because of what's happening around me, not because of anything that I'm doing, then that starts raising red alerts. And it starts escalating internally at the GC level as well, because your VDC your coordination lead at the general contractor might not have very much say, frankly, in how some certain things function from between sequence or from a cost perspective. And so if you start sniffing that, like, that's the way the project is going to go, like, start I don't think the change order route is necessarily a bad thing. It's also the subcontractors holding the GC accountable to the process as well.
Yeah, they're requiring you to do it. Now you're requiring them to uphold their end of the bargain as well.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's reasonable.
Yeah. And I guess I'll just kind of put this out there to everyone too. If you have any questions, there's a Q&A here, so feel free to ask your questions and we'll try and address them along the way. Jeremy, I'm going to kind of segue off of that a little bit. So one question I have is, what led you, as in Staff Electric, to adopt BIM as a company? Was it contractual obligations? Was it something else? Or if you don't even have an answer, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick answer, and I don't know it exactly. I know it was a very long time ago that we started doing BIM. And just to let you know, there is a question that popped up there. But I think that probably it started with being kind of a contractual obligation. You can get more jobs that way. I know the person who started the BIM department a long time ago. I remember I was looking at prints from 2002 where he was doing coordination on. We were looking at some as-builts. Just did it because he knew it was coming. So it was more of a let's start developing this at staff so that we're kind of ahead of the game when this becomes a real thing, where this is going to be an obligation on a lot of jobs and not just a couple select, maybe like big box stores or something like that. So,
I don't
because
think that's the normal approach, though.
no, I don't think so. I think it was a good approach because you can have a consultant come in and tell you everything that you need to do, but it still takes many years to actually get everyone to buy in and get used to it and kind of get all the other conduits like inputs that come into BIM and outputs that go out of BIM to get used to kind of that whole process.
Yeah, I think most companies implement BIM as it becomes a contractual obligation. And because of that, things aren't necessarily as proactive. So I think it's important to make sure we talk about getting field buy-in. Let's make sure at the start of a job as a subcontractor or a general contractor internally, you sit down with your team, you have a kickoff meeting, and you align expectations on what does BIM mean for this project and like what are we going to do. You talk about making sure you have those small wins. This is your first BIM project ever. Don't expect to do RTS points and full prefab and having your guys install off the BIM model. Just keep it simple. Like let's make sure we're saving our lanes and maybe we're getting some basic install drawings off of it. And once that team is comfortable with that approach, let's add something else on top of it. But you don't want to come out of the gates just screaming because you're setting yourself up for failure.
And I think setting those goals internally at the beginning of the process is important, and then communicating those goals at the beginning of the process to everyone else in the process. So if for example, if everyone wants to prefab 80% of the project, then that's a project goal that you can document. You can ask your GC to put it in their BIM execution plan. And that's a documented goal and of the team's priority for the process. So
That's a good point.
I think that and or if your goal is to get robotic total station points out of the model, that's a great goal too. Like,
yeah,
and then let's put that in there. And if you're not prefabbing, that's just as valuable as if you are prefabbing everything. So like making that known to the team as the process continues is important.
right. On the front end, like
Yes.
if there's no expectation of doing fabrication, you shouldn't be modeling to a fabrication level because you're just going to be wasting countless dollars going through when you can have a much simpler approach where we're just taking up the space.
Right.
We got some other questions in here. One of them, this sounds like a perfect question for Jeremy Poppy. Is there an advantage to having journey level electricians as drafters, and how many companies have them? Do you think there's any benefit, Jeremy?
Maybe not particularly me, but I think in general, yes. I think that it is. And I think one thing that I know a couple of people who maybe aren't electricians, but they're in the trades and they're licensed in whatever trade, came into the BIM department. Some people in the BIM department get a little nervous, like they're going to get replaced. I think you need this good mix because you're thinking about a lot of people who are very good with kind of like the software and the whole coordination process and all, when you say the software, I mean, there's so much of it and there's so much that can get utilized. And then you can have journeymen come in and they can help explain, okay, when we're putting in RTS points, this is how we actually install it. So I'll give you a really good example. In slab, it's very hard to imagine how a concrete pour goes and how the rebar goes in and what PT cable is and why you have to be away from it and all of these little nuances. It's very stressful. I would have to imagine it's very stressful to model this without actually really understanding what you're putting in. And so being able to have somebody in there that can advise on code and how things actually get installed. I do a ton of quality control because a lot of people don't know what they don't even know. And a lot of these topics aren't really that complicated. You just need to actually understand that certain things exist. So in electrical, a really good example is a lot of boxes have to be sized very particularly to make sure you can pull the wire through it. So a lot of people don't even know you have to do that. And you can have a resource in your department who can either just do it, or he can advise somebody on how to do it and teach them, then they can teach other people. So yeah, I do think it is really beneficial. To the second part of the question, yes, I think that companies that don't have journeymen in their BIM department have a pretty new BIM department. Most mature BIM departments definitely have a lot of tradespeople in it,
I think it's
but it's
been
still a
pretty,
mix.
I think it's been common practice for mechanical contractors for a long time, but I think it's becoming a little bit more of a norm for electrical and plumbing lately. And I think part of the reason for that is, I mean, yeah, you can have the best Revit system in place, but if you don't have somebody who knows about access and clearance zones and like you said, sizing boxes properly, it doesn't matter how awesome the Revit system we have in place is because it's not something that's constructible or up to code. And then you're dealing with all kinds of problems in the field. We got a couple other questions here. I'm going to answer this one live. Similar to the previous question, how do you manage this when the sub is not keeping up with the coordination effort on the BIM side? Donnie, I think I can think of a couple instances where you've had to deal with this in the past where your subcontractors were not able to keep up. How do you deal with that?
Case by case basis. If there's kind of two schools of projects. You have ones that are getting coordinated as it's getting built, more or less. And then you have other projects where you're coordinating months and months and months ahead of time. If I'm in this school of thought where we're months and months ahead of time, frankly, I kind of let it go. And I'll make it known that I let it go. And like, hey, this person is doesn't have the manpower, can't keep up. So let's just push pause. Let's give them some time to catch up, and then we'll continue from there. And that allows other people that are already caught up to rev back on resources. They're not sitting in stupid meetings, etc.
The reality there is if they're steamrolled, it's like near impossible to try to catch up otherwise. So I think that's a really good approach. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Donnie.
Yeah. So if you're in the other school of project where it's getting coordinated as construction is happening, that's a much more challenging conversation to have. I think you can manage it to actually as a GC to do something about it is a little bit more challenging. As a best practice, I put together a coordination schedule, setting the expectation about what the next month looks like, how many spaces are going to be overlapping, trying to give them dedicated time in that schedule to create shop drawings or install drawings and detail things out for their fab shop. If that's not being done as a trade partner, it's tough. That's a tough situation to be in, and I don't know. I personally don't. I think I'd be interested in hearing your feedback on that, Jeff and Jeremy. But I think in a worst case scenario from the GC side, we would ask them, or we would get a third party involved to help shore them up, to get them back up to speed.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. Otherwise, maybe potentially looking at changing the schedule slightly or something like that. But yeah, I mean, if they're not able to keep up, third party or additional resources, that's the only that's the only option I can even think of. Yeah.
The situation can kill the project.
No, it can absolutely.
If one team member isn't keeping up and dedicating the resources that are necessary to it, then everyone is dead in the water. It's where you can't. It becomes the whole process almost. I don't want to say trash, but
yeah,
it loses a lot of its value.
So we have time for one more question. Oh, here we go. What is a good and convincing statement that you like to convince someone that BIM is actually saving money and making installation easier, faster, and more accurate without going into specific project details? Jeremy, you got an answer for that one?
Yeah, I do. So kind of have to do this all the time. There is, in construction for a long time, we always said we built it twice. The estimators build it, and then we actually build it on site. What I like to say is, if we do coordination right, I like to take what the other Jeremy always says is call it virtual construction. If we do coordination right, we can literally build the job maybe 3 times now, but we can literally build it in a model. We can come up with pinch points. We can figure out your manpower. It's very hard to determine manpower like off of an estimate, but when you're actually in the model and you can see and you're talking with the other trades about how installation sequences can go and identifying like crit paths and seeing like densities of different trades in different parts of the job, you can figure out all of these things. So if you take it seriously, you can do it. And I'd say last, like a really good example that every foreman is going to understand is you have 5 guys that are installing on some area of the job, and you just get locked up because you need an RFI. So you would say, oh God, we got to RFI that. We can't proceed without an answer. You might, if you're lucky, if you send an email to the right people, you might get it in 3 days. You can send that RFI like months beforehand and literally have it answered, and you can even follow up with another RFI if you need to. So that's how I would respond to that.
I think the other thing to kind of address that too is field manpower is an issue. So if you aren't trying to do these things and you're working on a big job, you might not even have the manpower to be able to do it without doing RTS and prefab and things like that. This is a topic that we could probably talk for another 2 hours. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today. So I'd like to thank Evolve, Staff Electric, and myself for being here today. And I hope you join us for future webinars.
Thanks so much, Jeff, and couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks, Jeremy from Staff Electric and Donnie. And truly, I could have listened to that conversation go on for another couple hours. That's great, you guys. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
thanks to everyone who attended. Have a great day. And if you need the recording, make sure to catch that on the Evolve YouTube channel. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.